All right, I hope everyone is enjoying your lunch. For those of you online, I hope you had your lunch in front of you and able to get a couple of things done. I want to thank Mulan, who is the catering staff here and agency. So definitely if you're in St. Louis and looking for some catering, they are a great partner. So at the end of the last session, there were some comments regarding incentives by the state and funding for certain large projects. Well, there happens to be a plug that someone pulled in the federal funding bathtub that is sending a ton of money this way and has been for the last couple of years, whether it's the infrastructure or specific transportation or expansion in EPA and DOE funds to the IRA, the Infrastructure Reduction Act. Tons of dollars. And right now, very few people know exactly where all the money's going, how it can be used, but there's a lot of people interested in trying to find a way to access it. And from our work, we definitely know there are some innovative ways that Missouri can work on it. There are some innovative things that Missouri needs to do, and one of them is for all of us in this room and online to work together with the folks here that are about to talk to you to make sure that we get access to as much of that and spend it where it needs to be spent and make those billion-dollar economic numbers that we just saw in the last session pale in comparison in the next couple of years. So no pressure. That's your job today, is tell us how to quadruple those economic development numbers that we saw. But I am excited today. We have a great group of presenters to touch on a number of these topics. We have Elizabeth Presswood from the Missouri Department of Transportation, Lane Dilge from the U.S. Department of Energy, Caleb Hall from Stinson, Joe Bolin from EIERA, and Craig Redmond from the Missouri Department of Natural Resources Division of Energy. We are going to start with Elizabeth and MoDOT, talk about the EV stuff, and then move on to Lane and talk about what's happening with the DOE and those specific projects. So we will get Elizabeth up. Again, if you're online, please make sure that you use the chat or the Q&A to send us your questions. And Elizabeth is up. Can we hear you, Elizabeth?
Let's see. Can you hear me okay?
We hear you fantastically. Yes. Thank you so
Great.
much. I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person with y'all, but I appreciate the opportunity to present remotely. I think my title slide got lost in someone else's presentation. So there is a title to this. It's Planning for Electric Vehicle Charging Stations in Missouri. Again, my name is Elizabeth Presswood. I am the Policy and Innovation Program Manager at MoDOT, and I am overseeing the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Funds. Next slide, please. So I'll try and go through this, as succinctly as possible. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of information still coming out. I refer to this program as we're kind of building the car as we're driving it. So every day it seems like we're learning new guidelines, new best practices. So this is really a work in progress. But I'd just like to give you an overview of what we've been doing and where we're going. Slide. So it should come as, no new information, that there are typically three types of, electric vehicles. There's the battery electric vehicles, there's the plug-in hybrid, and then there's the hybrid vehicles. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I think the group that is in the room and online is pretty familiar with the capabilities and functions and how these cars are powered. Slide. Also, we have three different levels of charging. The level 1 is something that you would plug in at home. It's slower. It's something you could do overnight. Just uses a regular plug. The level 2 is something that people will call the dryer outlet plug. It can also be put in at your house. I know that some of the utility companies are putting in some incentives and time of use charging type parameters. So this is something that is still an emerging practice for the level 2 type chargers. There's also level 2 chargers that are out in the public facing world. You can see them at gas stations. I'm sorry, not gas stations usually. Well, yeah, I guess they are. I see them at, malls or shopping malls or grocery stores. So they're out there. They're a lot slower, but oftentimes they're not as expensive to use, or sometimes they're just free. And then finally, there's the level 3 DC fast chargers. These are the only type of chargers that can be funded with the NEVI program. So this is what we're really looking at. And this is an evolving and emerging technology to try and really cut down on the time. We're still looking at about 30 minutes to get a 250 miles worth of charge, depending on your vehicle and how much flow it can take on. So this is really what we're going to be focusing on. Slide. So just a quick look, how many electric vehicles are in the market and what are we anticipating? Nationwide, it should come as no surprise that California is really our leader. They make up the lion's share of existing vehicles and new car sales. We have approximately 290 million registered vehicles, and of those, just under 3 million are estimated to be EVs. In Missouri, we have less than 1% of our registered vehicle passenger fleet as EV. And they make up, again, less than 1% of our vehicle sales. So the Fuels Institute did some research and they've put out some really, really neat studies. If you have some spare time, go over to the Fuels Institute and read some of their reports. But they categorized different parts of the nation by state for EV priority. Again, California being number 1, and the Midwest section, specifically Missouri, we're a level 4 or one of the lowest priority for EV installation and adoption. Slide, please. So for the NEVI, which is again the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, this came out of the bipartisan infrastructure law. It is a new joint office of energy and transportation. There is $7.5 billion worth of funding. Of that, $5 billion is going to be for formula funding that gets distributed to the states directly. And then there's going to be a discretionary grant program worth in the tune of $2.5 billion. They being the joint office, has not released any additional information on the discretionary grants. So I'm going to be speaking just to the formula funding that is distributed out to the states. This is dedicated formula funding for just chargers. Missouri is slated to get just under about $100 million. I have asterisk there that it's subject to change. I've already heard that we have received some revised numbers, that it's gone down. I don't know what that is yet. So in the next version of the plan, that'll be updated. It's also important to note that these NEVI funds require an 80-20 match. So it can be 80% of the NEVI funds that needs to be matched with 20% non-federal funds. And it's important to note here that Missouri Department of Transportation is unable to match these funds with our state road funds. It's in statute that the state road fund can only be used on road construction. And so all of these stations are going to be off of our right of way. Slide, please. This map is the existing alternative fuels corridor, and the green is EV ready, and then the dashed are EV pending. And so this is the map that makes up the different corridors across the US that NEVI is really trying to hit. We're looking to install throughout the life of the program 500,000 chargers placed every 50 miles on the AFC within 1 mile driving distance of these corridors. So for Missouri, it really includes most of our interstate highways. At the end of the presentation, there is a link to our NEVI plan, and you can spend some time with this map and slide. This map right here. I hate it when people say, I know the map is hard to read, but, and this is one that, maybe at your desk, you can sit down and go into this one and really just spend some time looking at where the stations are identified, which ones are NEVI compliant, which stations need to be upgraded, and then where the station location of new stations has been identified. And these are the new station locations. Those are not specific, we're looking at intersections. That's just the 50-mile break point from, one station to the next. So I encourage you to go to our website, spend some time with us, and see, where these stations are and where the needs are. Slide. So the program requirements, like I mentioned, 500,000 DC fast chargers installed on the AFS network every 50 miles within 1 mile. The stations, now this is where it gets a little bit more specific. They have to provide at least 4 of the CCS, or the combined charging system, which is the port, to simultaneously charge 4 EVs at 150 kilowatts each. So these stations need to be capable of 600 kilowatts. And in some areas, that's not a big deal. But I think this group, I'm speaking to the choir here of putting that type of station out in a rural area. That's going to be the largest load in, a pretty wide range. So that's something that we're really looking at. And then a final one is that it needs to meet the Justice 40 guidelines. And this is building off of the disadvantaged communities. On the previous map there, we have our Justice 40 outlined in gray. So what that means, if you're not familiar with it, is that 40% of the identified benefit of these chargers needs to go to these Justice 40s. So that through jobs, through environmental positive impacts. We're still really trying to define that as all of my peers in other states of how do we meet this Justice 40 short of just putting a charger in, a Justice 40 area. Slide. So these are just the requirements of the plan. I'll go through these slides pretty quick because we already have the plan developed and published. It's finalized. We're going to be working on our next iteration of updating it, but just so you can kind of get an overview of what's in there. We have the federal share and match, the funding requirements, project eligibility, and then deployment and siting considerations. Slide. So again, 80% match, and then the private funds can be used as match. So we're really looking to partner with our private sector and the utility companies to get these stations installed. Slide. Again, some of this is just repeat along the AFC, 50 miles of spacing, 1 mile, minimum of 4 ports at 150 each. Slide. Let's see. So some of the things that are eligible with the NEVI funds is acquisition and installation. You can upgrade on-site power and storage. This is one that we're still waiting for some final rulemaking of how far down the line can these upgrades go to the utility infrastructure itself to deliver this type of load. The operating and maintenance is eligible, development of the phase activity, signage and traffic control devices, so wayfinding, and then there are other eligible items that are outlined in our plan. Slide. So the development and siting, again, just, kind of a broken record, 50 miles within 1 mile of AFC. There needs to be connections to the electric grid. We're looking for proximity to existing businesses and services and amenities while people are waiting to charge. Looking at the needs in the rural and disadvantaged areas, fostering the private investment and meeting the market demands. Slide. So this is just an outline of the plan development. I'm not going to read it to you because it's basically just a table of contents, which you can find when you go and read through the plan. Slide. So our next steps, one thing that came out of a bill in 2020 was the development of an EV task force. And so that task force has been meeting since this summer. The Department of Transportation has a seat on that task force. It is chaired by the Department of Revenue, and there is a report that is supposed to be provided back to the legislative body by the end of this year, so December 31st. And it is looking at the state of EV and the adoption and making recommendations and policy to move forward to continue a healthy environment of how we adopt and put in these EV charging stations. In the coming years, we're going to continue and really ramp up our engagement with the stakeholders. There hasn't been very much stakeholder engagement to date. The NEVI program was put out really rather fast, and all the states were under the gun to put together a plan in very short order. I think we had about 4 months, so we did not have a chance to do a lot of public engagement with our stakeholders. That's something that we're going to be going back out and seeing what people, what the public really wants and needs, how they envision the future of EV charging and what their interface they need, as far as even paying for it or finding them, and uptime and resiliency. So there's a lot of work yet to be done. And then that last one, that link is you can go to the MoDOT website, and there's a link for NEVI on there. And that's where our plan is and some additional information. The plan needs to be updated annually. It was just submitted this at the end of summer, so in August, and we'll be looking to do an update to that plan in the coming months. Next slide, please. So that's just really a high overview. When it comes to the panel discussion, I will hope to answer any of your questions, but thank you very much.
Great. Hi, everyone. So nice to be with you today. My name is Lane Dilg. I'm a senior advisor in the Office of the Undersecretary for Infrastructure in the Department of Energy. And we are really thrilled to be with you. I wish I could be with you there in person. I have been spending time across the country really highlighting some of the opportunities that are available and talking particularly about the way that the Department of Energy is engaged in place-based thinking as we look at funding opportunities that are coming online. Next slide. So just as background, I know many of you are familiar with the new laws enacted by Congress that have come out over the past now slightly more than a year. When we talk about these, just to give you a framework, the analogy that the Secretary of Infrastructure likes to use is actually an analogy of the body. So we look at the bipartisan infrastructure law as the backbone, a long-term investment in our nation's infrastructure to ensure that all other pieces of the clean energy economy and economic transformation have the foundational infrastructure that will be necessary for us to collectively succeed. Then we look at the CHIPS and the Science Act as the brains, investing in cutting-edge science and innovation, and recognizing that the semiconductor was invented here in the United States of America, but currently we are producing less than 10% of the global supply. So really looking at the CHIPS and Science Act as continuing American leadership in science and innovation while boosting critical manufacturing, particularly in the semiconductor space, and bringing those jobs and supply chains to the United States of America. We then look at the Inflation Reduction Act as the heart and the lungs. This is the law that is intended really to bring the private sector off the sidelines and to lift our clean energy economy by incentivizing the deployment of private capital into our supply chains and into the clean energy economy as it is built out, all the while reducing energy costs for American families. Next slide. So I won't talk about everything that's in these laws, but some quick overviews. Particularly as we look at the bipartisan infrastructure law, we are very focused on transportation, ports, airports, railroad, roads, bridges, electric vehicles, which you just heard a great deal about, and sustainable transportation initiatives. Those obviously critical to ensuring that our economy moves across the country and that we're building for the future in the way that we do move. I like to point to, there was a Department of Transportation initial announcement of selections, $1.2 billion out of this over $100 billion that you're looking here at in the transportation area. that 1.2 billion alone, repairing critical bridge and road structures across our country, as well as taking care of things like commercial truck parking and other stopgaps that have been impacting our supply chains. So every announcement rolling out really impacting local communities, but also impacting the way our economy moves across the country. Broadband, obviously foundational to everything that we do, and ensuring that we have reliable high-speed broadband across the country. Then obviously in the Department of Energy, a key focus on the grid, both resilience and longevity, and those investments continuing to roll out from the Department of Energy. We also have the clean energy demonstrations coming out of the Department of Energy. These you may have seen the clean hydrogen funding opportunity announcement for hydrogen hubs is on the streets right now. And there is money in the bipartisan infrastructure law for $10 billion in carbon capture, direct carbon capture, sequestration and utilization, as well as direct air capture and industrial emissions reduction. Also advanced nuclear in the clean energy demonstration space. Those investments, again, foundational to our energy and our energy sources in our economy, and also presenting the opportunity both to make investments in American communities and also to showcase American innovation. And then the manufacturing space, which is where I do most of my work, investing billions of dollars in the supply chain for electric vehicle batteries, lithium-ion batteries, as well as the necessary manufacturing base for clean hydrogen, and looking particularly at recycling. So we often by shorthand say manufacturing, where we also mean recycling, but the secondary market being critical to our clean energy and other supply chains. Next slide. The Inflation Reduction Act, as well, looking at domestic job creation, looking at energy affordability and savings, and particularly focused, as I'll talk about in just a second, on energy communities and making investments that target economic development and do so in a concerted and intentional way to draw on the assets that we have, both across workforce and infrastructure, and also with a focus separately on disadvantaged communities, those that may have suffered undue burdens in the past, ensuring that the investments we make now are shared equitably across the country. Next slide. So in IRA, I talked about this a little bit, but really focused on ensuring that tax credits both stimulate demand and provide supply for energy affordability, energy resilience, and energy availability across the country, and also providing that incentive to place manufacturing facilities in American communities that will provide high quality jobs for the long term. I heard it referenced earlier in one of the presentations. It is deeply critical on our side as well that as we set up facilities that receive government funding, that those be facilities that are set up to sustain communities for the long haul, that we be making intentional investments that are tied and aligned to workforce development for quality jobs, not just now, but over the long term. Next slide. So when we look at the manufacturing incentives, many of you are likely aware of the tax credits that are run by the Department of Treasury, but we do expect announcements from Treasury regarding the 45X Advanced Energy Manufacturing Credit, which is a production tax credit, providing incentives to produce solar, wind, battery components, critical minerals for clean energy supply chains, as well as the $10 billion in 48C investment tax credits that provide the initial CapEx support to try to bring new facilities online, as well as to expand and re-equip existing facilities. Defense Production Act also very much central to these efforts, particularly right now, the Department of Energy focused on heat pumps and Defense Production Act authority related to heat pumps. We did have a request for information out there that is publicly available. And as you heard about earlier, obviously looking at the growth of the EV market and all of the many ways that that interconnects into our economy and supports American communities, particularly through advanced technology vehicle manufacturing and domestic manufacturing conversion grants that are focused on that EV supply chain. Next slide. So do want to highlight the Loan Programs Office expansion for those of you who are looking to finance projects to step into different areas of the clean energy economy. The Department of Energy's Loan Programs Office does have new authorities, both expanding existing authorities for innovative energy technologies and for advanced vehicle technologies, but also, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, a new energy infrastructure reinvestment program for projects that retool, repower, repurpose, or replace energy infrastructure that has ceased operation, and for energy infrastructure to avoid, reduce, sequester, or use air pollution or greenhouse gas emissions. So DOE Loan Programs Office, as you can see from the image on the top, really focused on that bridge to bankability and really focused on bringing technologies across the lines from first commercial deployments to scale up and to the debt markets. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, across all of this work, we are very focused on the contributions that energy communities have made to the American economy and to the assets that exist in our energy communities. So as we look at transition of particular assets that are available, I mentioned the LPO program that is focused specifically on transition of energy infrastructure, but there is also a recognition across all of these laws that our energy communities have deeply skilled workforces and critical infrastructure that can be enabled and promoted as part of this work. And that one of the reasons that we particularly want to be across the country highlighting these opportunities and highlighting opportunities for particular communities to step into these areas. Next slide. So as we look at that, the program nearest and dearest to my own heart here at the Department of Energy, because I spend a great deal of time on it, is the Advanced Energy Manufacturing and Recycling Grant Program. This is a $750 million grant program that will provide grants to small and medium manufacturers that are located in census tracts where coal mines or coal-fired power plant units have closed, and that, or census tracts that are immediately adjacent to those census tracts, will provide grants to small and medium manufacturing firms to establish new facilities or to re-equip or expand existing facilities, to produce or recycle what you can think of as property really across any of the clean energy supply chains. So the many, many different components and materials that we need across clean energy supply chains to move through this transition and to lead in this transition. This is a grant program that is available to support manufacturing and recycling across all of those supply chains, and that is specifically focused on energy communities. So as we look at that, that grant program also does have a statutory priority coming from Congress for minority-owned firms, again, to ensure that, that as we are making investments, we are making them equitably and understanding opportunities, historic barriers to access, and providing key opportunities in that space. This $750 million grant program, we have publicly said there will be a funding opportunity announcement estimated for the first quarter of 2023. And it is important to the Department of Energy's work because we do know that across hydrogen work, across the grid and transmission, across the EV battery space and elsewhere, that there are critical supply chain needs that facilities can either be stood up or re-equipped to provide in order to support secure, resilient domestic supply chains. So this is one that we're very focused on. The statutory language of this grant program is quite similar to the 48C investment tax credit, which also will support manufacturing and recycling projects across the country, but with $4 billion of the $10 billion available in tax credits, particularly focused on energy communities and specifically communities where coal mines or coal-fired power plant units have closed. Then looking, we've talked some about EV battery manufacturing and recycling, so that being another area where we are focused. And as I mentioned, this new LPO Energy Infrastructure Reinvestment Program, really providing opportunities and encouraging people to think about what are the assets in energy infrastructure that are being taken offline or have been taken offline, and how can they be repurposed? We know that we have assets. How can we work together to transition those assets and to see them post-closure as assets that are supporting the future? Next slide. This is a map available online for the Advanced Energy Manufacturing and Recycling Grant Program, and I apologize, it should be expanded slightly, but online you can dig into it a little bit. That shows the relevant census tracts where coal mines or coal-fired power plant units have closed in the relevant timeframes for that grant program. But the Department of Energy recognizing that as we make investments across these different supply chains, we are also investing in American communities and doing that quite intentionally, again, with a focus on high quality jobs and projects that will bring sustained community benefits for the long term. Next slide. We also, as part of our funding opportunity announcements, you will see language specifically focused on community benefits and on ensuring that the investments we make both are consistent with the President's Justice 40 initiative, are focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, are creating good, high-paying quality jobs, and are made in consultation and with engagement with the relevant communities where the projects will be sited. Next slide. So here are some links for additional information, but generally would refer you both to the Department of Energy website, and happy to provide additional information on specific programs as they come out. There is a tremendous amount of excitement at the Department of Energy about engaging in groups just like this and really focusing on economic development and working together across these opportunities to make sure that we are investing across the country for the future. So these are some of the key links, and happy to provide additional information as needed. Next slide. So I know that was quite a bit from me, but really appreciate the opportunity to be with you, at least virtually, and look forward to continued engagement. And thanks for the invitation.
This working? Oh, yes, it is. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Caleb Hall. I'm an associate at Simpson LP. I like to specialize in litigation involving anything energy, utility, and infrastructure. Before then, I was an attorney for Missouri's Office of Public Counsel. Before doing that, I helped staff the Missouri House Utilities Committee. And before doing anything impressive like that, I had some odd jobs before then. At one point, I was a carnival ride operator before going to law school. At that point, I am reminded that I should give the disclosure that the views I give during this presentation should not reflect Simpson. These are instead only my views and my opinions on the Inflation Reduction Act. Next slide, please. So we've just heard quite a bit about the Inflation Reduction Act. I will try not to be redundant. It's a 300-page behemoth that I think is helpful to break down into its three main parts. The first are what I like to call the climate change mitigation programs. These are the investments that you'll see in energy and infrastructure, anything involving the environment. I just put that in the climate change bucket. The next one is reforms to the Internal Revenue Service, staffing, and tax treatment. And the third prong of the IRA is healthcare reform. Next slide. So briefly, the reason why the healthcare reform and the IRS parts are important to the IRA is, despite the name Inflation Reduction Act, this was an appropriations bill. It is a $440 billion spending package. And the conceit is that the programs within will generate $740 billion worth of revenue, thereby creating a deficit reduction of $300 billion. One of the ways that the bill is intended to reduce this federal spending is through reforms to Medicare programs. Medicare can now negotiate drug prices for participants as well. This new power is intended to capitalize on the government's monopsony status to reduce overall federal program spending. The IRA also limits the amount of additional funds that enrollees will need to contribute annually to their plans to $2,000 in caps, and the cap on insulin price of $35 per month just went into effect this week. Also, drug manufacturers receiving Medicare dollars are required to rebate money if their drug prices increase higher than the rate of inflation. And the last part to note about the IRA for healthcare purposes is that the Affordable Care Act premiums for healthcare plans that were set to expire this year have now been extended through 2024. Next slide. For the Internal Revenue Service, this is one of the easiest things to note where you're going to generate revenue. The IRA sets a new minimum corporate tax rate of 15% on financial statement income for most corporations other than a real estate investment trust, S corps, and regulated investment companies. The IRA also instituted a 1% excise tax on stock repurchases by publicly traded companies. And there's been a lot of press about the new staffing for the IRS. $80 billion has been authorized to hire more IRS personnel. If you have more tax collectors, you can bring in more tax, you bring in more revenue. Pretty self-explanatory. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has said that this money will not be spent on audits or any tax collections for individuals, businesses, and households that are making less than $400,000 a year. Time will tell whether or not that political promise can be kept. Next slide. Now we can focus on the climate change bucket, the whole reason why we're actually here. So this list is not meant to be exhaustive of the programs within the IRA, but it is supposed to give you a general idea of what type of investments the IRA is trying to incentivize. The entire goal of the IRA, as postulated by the sponsor, Representative Yarmuth, and the posturing from the Biden administration, is to reduce carbon emissions 40% below 2005 levels by 2030. Pretty bold goal, to say the least. One of those programs that's supposed to reach that goal are direct consumer rebates for energy efficiency measures and rebate appliance replacements. You have limits of $14,000 for individuals and $400,000 rebates are available for multifamily dwellings. Approximately $4.3 billion has been authorized through 2031 for these rebate programs. The U.S. Treasury is going to be providing grants to state energy offices who are to then fund home energy efficiency rebates and home audits and retrofits. This is meant to be coordinated through the Federal Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. Rebates will range from $2,000 to $4,000 per dwelling unit for the home audit program. In addition, individual taxpayers may also claim a household solar tax credit based on 30% of the asset's value. This tax program was already in effect. It has now been extended to the IRA. The IRA also includes specific appliance upgrade and retrofit programs for targeting Indian country and disadvantaged communities. As we've heard just before me from Lane, disadvantage in this circumstance is based on economic, social, and environmental attributes. So it's taking St. Louis example. A lot of these programs will be are meant to target North County as opposed to South County, but not necessarily limited towards those traditional views of disadvantage and privilege. So if you're in the market for electric car, this is the best time for it. Another tax credit of up to $7,500 is available for individuals purchasing a new electric vehicle, and up to $4,000 if you're in the market for a used electric vehicle. Commercial vehicle operators will also be able to claim a tax credit up to $40,000 when purchasing electric vehicles for a fleet program. This will be more useful for a company that has vehicles that you see on the highway. Think of transportation fleets, a transportation network company. That's going to be less useful for vehicles that don't qualify, like think of, lost my vocabulary for a second. I was trying to say forklift, and I forget the technical term, but the vehicles that are taxiing your luggage on the runway for an airplane. Finally, $3 billion is available through 2028 for loans to re-equip, expand, or establish zero and low emission vehicle technology facilities in the US. These facilities can include public-private partnerships, institutions of higher education, and certain private research institutions. The goal of this program is to improve domestic production and sourcing of the materials that will be needed for the spread of EVs. What do I mean by that? Think about, there's only so much lithium you can extract from a limited resource. And the idea is to create some type of technological innovation or proof of concept to show that you can increase domestic production of lithium either from what limited resources are available, produce the same amount of resource with less emissions, or otherwise expand and facilitate the growth of EVs throughout the country. Next slide, please. These two credits are probably some of the biggest incentives that you'll see in the IRA, or at least two of the most prominent and well-known. The production tax credit and the investment tax credit. Wayne already spoke to the industries that are eligible for the production tax credit. You have wind, solar, closed loop biomass, open loop biomass, geothermal, and landfill gas, or new industries that can now take advantage of this. The idea is there is a tax credit available based on how much kilowatt hours are actually produced. On the opposite end, you have the investment tax credit. This is the tax credit amount based on the value of the asset that is put into place. So you have $100 worth of a solar facility put it in, you have a 6% credit on $100. You may notice the reference to multipliers here. The IRA actually reduced the base value of these credits. They already existed. The production tax credit used to be 1.2 cents per kilowatt. What the IRA adds in conjunction with reducing the actual base value is the chance to multiply your credit to ultimately get overall more savings and overall more incentive. For instance, you can quintuple the value of the production tax credit by following certain prevailing wage and apprenticeship programs. Under the prevailing wage requirements, laborers and workers at a renewable energy facility will need to be paid local prevailing wages as established by the Secretary of Labor during the construction of the project, and if done so and verified, the producer of that energy can then increase the value of the production tax credit. And the same applies to the apprenticeship program. Starting this year, the apprenticeship threshold is that 10% of total labor hours for a project need to be based on a qualified apprenticeship program. Starting next month in 2023, that value will increase to 12.5%. 2 years later, increases to 15%. Furthermore, you could increase the production tax credit an additional 10% if a qualifying facility is built in what is called a energy community, such as a place where, as I mentioned, a coal mine or a coal production facility has recently shuttered its operations, and we've had subsequent unemployment. One can imagine a strategy where an energy provider retires a long-standing coal facility and then uses that real estate to reconstruct it into a solar or wind facility to then take advantage of these enhanced PTCs. Oh, and I forgot to mention, another part of the factors for increasing the level of the PTC is to source the resources for the new investments using domestic steel and other products. The investment tax credit has the same type of multipliers. For example, projects satisfying the projects that are placed in service after this year can receive an additional 10% if the new facility is constructed using certain levels of steel, iron, or other manufactured products that are sourced from the U.S. Both of these credits have a phase down period beginning either 2032. That's easy. Other option, the year in which greenhouse gas emissions from the electric utility sector are equal to or less than 25% of 2022 sector emission levels. I don't know when that year is, but I know when 2032 is. I should also mention that a facility can qualify for either of these credits, but not both. So you have to take your pick. Next slide, please. Another part of the IRA were the creation of several different funding programs within the Clean Air Act. A lot of these are going to touch upon the same programs that you just heard from the Division of Energy. These were actual amendments to the Clean Air Act, but not amendments to the substantive portions of the Clean Air Act. Like the IRA did not amend particulate matter standards, NAC standard. It was more of the creation of electrification loan and rebate programs within the actual text of the Clean Air Act. $400 million has been authorized for contractors that propose programs that replace eligible vehicles that serve communities in non-attainment areas. Another $2.25 billion is available through 2027 for projects that can electrify port authorities throughout the U.S. And $27 billion has been authorized for green banks to invest in local greenhouse gas emission projects, and that can be used to finance home and large business scale energy efficiency and, for example, some type of solar or renewable project. Special note that I want to note here is the definition of greenhouse gas. Within each of these funding programs within the Clean Air Act, this definition was added 15 times. An explicit reference of greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide, and we're going to identify it as a pollutant. A lot of legal commentators have opined, and I agree, that this was added to the IRA largely in response to the U.S. Supreme Court's decision this summer and West Virginia versus EPA. That decision said that the EPA could not use its Section 111D authority to require the energy industry to shift from fossil fuel production to other renewable sources. That opinion is partially based on the idea that the Clean Air Act did not explicitly reference greenhouse gas emissions as a pollutant for stationary sources. That argument can still be made. It's harder to make now when you have this definition in the Clean Air Act 15 different times, albeit in different unrelated parts of the act. Next slide, please. So at this point, I would be available for questions, but before I relinquish the captive dog, no, I guess at this mark, I'd like to relinquish my time so we can focus more on how what these type of programs will mean for Missouri. And thank you for your time.
I'm just not getting that. There we go. Good afternoon. My name is Joe Boland. I'm the Executive Director of the Missouri Environmental Improvement and Energy Resources Authority. We are a quasi-governmental instrumentality of the state associated with the Department of Natural Resources. We're one of the bond issuing authorities for the state. We work in cooperation with DNR's water and energy programs. Um, so I will actually be talking very specifically about one part of the IRA, very specifically section 60103, which, as Caleb mentioned, creates the greenhouse gas reduction fund. Sorry, the greenhouse gas reduction fund. Section 60103 actually creates a new section of the Clean Air Act, section 134, and makes 27 billion available in three very distinct pots. The first one is the zero emission zero emission technologies section, which, and this slide, this is probably going to be up for the majority of my comments. And I stole it from EPA. It's a very good summary of section 134. But again, the ZET section provides 7 billion to states, municipalities, tribal governments, and very specifically to eligible recipients. And we'll talk about that definition here in a second. Eligible recipients for financial and technical assistance to enable low-income and disadvantaged communities to deploy or benefit from zero-emission technologies, focusing on rooftop solar. And this is another very important statement from the statute, focusing on rooftop solar and other greenhouse gas reduction activities as determined by the administrator. So in a lot of the congressional testimony for this bill, the sponsors were really focusing on rooftop solar. But as you can see, that one clause in this part of the statute really opens it up for any other air contaminant that the EPA administrators deemed okay. So immediately the challenges we see with this section, it is basically the carve out for the states and municipalities and tribal governments very specifically, but it's dedicated to low income and disadvantaged communities, which is a very good thing. But as a lot of you know better than I do, focusing rooftop solar in low income communities is a very difficult thing to accomplish, since the majority of a lot of lower income population does not own their home or own their apartment. So that becomes one very difficult challenge to deal with. And as I pointed out, the one of the bright points here is, well, as Caleb pointed out, the very specific definition of greenhouse gas was very specific to the 6 or 7 compounds. However, that clause in this part of the statute that allows for the EPA administrator to deem anything they seem as appropriate as an air contaminant kind of really opens things up. So I think we're very interested in how EPA interprets that and how they broaden the applicability of this part of the statute. So that's the first sector, or first part, is 7 billion to states, municipalities, and tribal governments. The second section, second category, is the broadest in applicability, and that's just the general assistance category, where 11.9 billion is available only to eligible recipients. And that's exactly what the statute said, is eligible recipients to invest directly or indirectly into energy projects or qualified projects, according to the statutory definition. As you can see up here on the slide to the upper right, there's a very specific definition of eligible recipient. And a nonprofit that provides capital, including by leveraging private capital, does not take deposits other than from repayments and other revenue from using these grant funds, is funded by public or charitable contributions, and invests in finances projects alone or with investors. That to us was a very odd definition of eligible recipient, but it was done very purposefully. So not only the general assistance pot, which is the biggest and the broadest the 12 billion, but the last category of low income and disadvantaged communities for another 8 billion is only available to eligible recipients as well. So I think that was really done purposefully. And some of you are aware of the Coalition for Green Capital. They're a national nonprofit that has been pushing this legislation for a number of years. They were a driving force behind the successful passage of it. And I think they've been positioning themselves, they meet this definition, by the way. So they've been positioning themselves to be the recipient of the last two pots of funding, the 12 billion and the 8 billion, to basically be the National Green Bank looking statewide. And some of the arguments for that were, again, going back to the congressional testimony, there are no boundaries associated with the National Green Bank. They can award to states, municipalities, directly to tribal governments or to other nonprofits. So that kind of opens up another very interesting pathway for some of this money, and we'll be keeping a close eye on that. So, and again, they can, according to statute, they can, as I just said, they can invest directly into projects from that national level, or they can pass the money through to other existing public or quasi-public, similar to the authority, or not nonprofits for assistance at the state, local, or tribal level. So, and again, I don't think this definition is up here, but qualified projects is defined in the statute. In the statute, by the way, this is, the IRA itself is very, very large, but section 60103 is only 3 pages long for this 27 billion. So it's a very short statute, but has a huge impact, or a huge potential impact. Regardless, qualified projects is defined differently in the 7 billion pot for the states versus the 12 billion and $8 billion pots. So again, for the $7 billion pot for the states, it's directed towards low income, mostly for rooftop solar and other air contaminants to reduce the impact on greenhouse gas emissions. But the definition for the 12 billion and $8 billion pots includes any project, activity, or technology that reduces or avoids greenhouse gas emissions and other forms of air pollution in partnership with and by leveraging investment from the private sector. So you heard the Department of Energy mention the goal of partnering with private industry and leveraging private capital. You can definitely sense that in reading the statute and the congressional testimony. And that's really going to be one of our focuses, is rolling this out, hopefully in a similar process to, if anybody's familiar with the state revolving funds for water and wastewater, basically capitalized from the federal level, and then each state leverages that in the best way they can based on the requirements or needs of their own state. We're looking at this as very analogous process. If we, the state, is successful in capturing any of this money, and I'll be talking more about that later. But so again, qualified projects was reducing or avoiding greenhouse gas emissions or other forms of air pollution in partnership with leveraging these same dollars, or anything that assists communities in their efforts to reduce or avoid greenhouse gas emissions and other forms of air pollution. So there's some real subtle differences in the definitions in each of the 3 pots. But again, it's going to be very interesting in how EPA interprets this, and basically combines all the comments that were due. Actually, this last Monday, there were comments due to EPA, and I'm sure some of you may have actually commented on this. But again, as I ramble, the last category again is low income and disadvantaged communities, where 8 billion is carved out. to pass through to either National Green Bank or whoever can define themselves as an eligible recipient. And again, it's to provide financial and technical assistance identical to the general assistance category, except that it has to be provided to low-income and disadvantaged communities again. So obviously, there's a very large focus on Justice 40 and addressing the needs in our low-income and disadvantaged communities. Just some quick thoughts before I move on. I think we talked about the Coalition Green Bank or this National Green Bank concept. I've been on a lot of national comment committees, and not every state agrees with that approach. And some of that might have to do with the politics of each of the states, but we'll be very interested to see how EPA does end up designing this program, whether it's a formulaic based distribution or if they're going to just push the majority of this money into the National Green Bank and then distribute it based on other priorities and challenges. We'll be watching that very closely. And I failed to mention at the very beginning, a very, very important part of this is each category, every bit of the 27 billion is to be allotted on a competitive basis. So that kind of flies in the face of a lot of the states wanted to take in a formulaic approach, like I said, very similar to the water state revolving fund programs, but I'm not sure if that will be the end result or not, but we'll keep an eye on it. One other thing are the very tight timeline associated with this. The statute required for funds to begin flowing, at least out of the 7 billion category, they need to start flowing by the middle of February of this spring. So that's going to be a huge undertaking for EPA. And I guess the more concerning deadline is this funding is only available, according to the statute, until September 30th of 2024. So that's less than 2 years to design a program, a national program, figure out how they're going to distribute the money evenly and fairly, and then have less than 2 years to get it all distributed. So again, it was a very short piece of legislation with a tremendous impact. And from a state perspective, we're certainly hoping to leverage this opportunity to further our goals in creating an energy infrastructure bank here in Missouri. We've been partnering with Missouri's Division of Energy and gotten support from our board and our chairman, who's here today. With that, those are some of my higher level comments for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund specifically. If we go to the next slide. We can't go to the next slide. There we go. I mentioned this, the concept of an energy infrastructure bank. We're looking to create something very similar to what we do on the water side. Like I mentioned, we've been a partner with DNR, leveraging their water and wastewater funds for the past 30 years and have a great track record. We know the markets. We have our own finance team. So we're looking to do the same thing on the energy side. And we see this Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund as a great source of capital to get this done, at least give us a jump start. So I think I covered most of this. The important thing I want to mention today is, of course, you can see it's going to be a broad array of projects that we're looking to finance, pretty much anything across the board related to energy development, energy efficiency, energy renewal. Go to the next slide. And this is a shameless plug that we actually have an RFP published right now on our website and I encourage you all to check it out. It's I'll be honest, we don't really have any funding in hand right now, but I think we're very well positioned to capture some of this greenhouse gas reduction fund. So this RFP is kind of our next step in trying to capture some of the need out there, some of the potential projects that might be out there that we don't know about, and to be a more competitive applicant for some of this federal money. We definitely wanted to have a pipeline of projects, or at least some kind of catalog of projects we can draw from to be competitive for that money. So, next slide. And that's really it for me for my formal comments. And I think we'll have a panel questions later. All right. I'll hand it over to Craig.
I got it working good. All right. Well, I've been given the cut it short sign, which doesn't bother me at all. My name's Craig Redmond. I'm the Director of Division of Energy. I may be the only dark spot on Rob Dixon's illustrious career, because he hired me about 4 years ago when we were still located over at DE, poor guy. But a little bit real quickly about what the Division of Energy entails. Missouri Division of Energy is our state energy office. We focus on affordable, reliable Missouri-made energy, assisting communities across the state of Missouri with their particular needs, serving as a source of energy information for our citizens, stakeholders, and policymakers. Primarily funded through the US DOE, energy loan earnings, and a portion of LIHEAP of our state weatherization. Our main sections are energy efficiency, emergency resource group, which includes our energy loan program, low income weatherization assistance, and our analysis, coordination, and education. And this group here is, so rest assured, the last group that I mentioned, I brought Jordan Elliott. He's the manager of that group. A lot of good young minds in there. They're the ones that are scouring these bills to make sure that we're not missing things and going forward with that. But Jordan and our deputy, Emily Wilbur, have worked very hard at getting this information put together. So next slide, please. So we have the two bills that we've talked a lot about today, the BIL, Bipartisan Infrastructure, and the IRA. Also in the IRA, which Caleb has talked quite a bit about, is our tax incentives. In many cases, on most all of these cases, we are waiting information from US DOE about our guidance and our funding release dates. So a lot of the information I'm going to give you is at a high level view. Also, if you have more questions, because I will kind of run through this, please go to our website and click on get any updates. There'll be a big green button, so that can fill you in more detail. Next slide, please. Okay, we'll go through the BIL programs real quickly. The first one is our state energy program. This is additional funding for DE's program and activities, programs that we kind of already do that we can increase on, resiliency and education of the communities. We're going to get almost $8 million, but that's spread out over 5 years. Our application there has already been submitted. The weatherization program, we oversee the weatherization program for the entire state. There's 18 subgrantees around the state that do these projects for us based on income eligibility. And it not only adds to the effectiveness of their energy efficiency, but it improves their health, comfort, and safety. $77.3 million plus another $128,000 that has been allocated to that, which we have spread out across the state to our subgrantees. Next one is our Energy Efficiency and Conservative Block Grant Program. This one is probably the most complicated, and the one that we would hope that you would go to our website and we can give you more details about those. but that's 2.4 million over 5 years. Then we have the Energy Efficiency Revolving Loan Program, Capitalization Grant Program. This could be similar to the program that we already administer with, that we have in our group, but we would be able to extend and encompass more entities in this. In our existing one, we only do schools, counties, municipalities, and non-for-profits. This would let us go to some more commercial type industrial people. And that is 9.1 million over 5 years. And then finally, on this one, we have the grid resiliency formula. This improves the response and the resiliency of communities around the state of Missouri. And we got 6.9 for our first year. This program's already changed because its first application due date was, I believe, in November. Jordan shaking his head yes, so I got it right. Now they have pushed that back to March of the next year, where you can actually apply for 2 years. And 6.9 is our first year. We haven't been told exactly what our second year amount's going to be. We're assuming it's going to be another 6.9. And talking a little bit about IRA, we've already mentioned about the home energy performance-based rebates that are going to be out there. Those are going to be based off of either energy audits or modeling. That's where if you have a home that might have a old gas furnace and you're going to upgrade to a modern heat pump, it will be based on the savings there. That is 75.8 million, but that's over 10 years. Those programs are extended out a little bit longer. The next one is the high efficiency electric home rebate, which would not require an energy audit. It would just be the straight replacement to an energy efficiency item, and you would get a certain amount for that. Again, that's 75.4 million over 10 years. And then the state-based home energy contractor training grants that are out there. This way we can train those people to be able to go out into our communities and perform these audits. And that is 200 million nationally. So, and we have no further information on that one. And then talking a little bit about some possible related programs that are out there, but these are generally competitive. So we're going to focus in on those after we feel like we have a handle on the ones that are not competitive. The discretionary grant program for charging and fueling infrastructure, energy audit training, resilience and efficient codes implementation, and Joe mentioned the greenhouse gas reduction fund. Okay, we need to skip a couple here. Keep going. Skip. Okay, we'll go to that one. That's the last one. How was that for Josh? Got it right up there. Guys, thank you. I will be around if we have time for questions.
All right, thank you very much. Now, we literally called this the flooding of federal funds. I don't know about you, but that was a lot of information by everybody. So please do know that the slides from today will be available. Also, the recording from today will also be available. So you don't have to prodigiously write your notes. If you did see me after, I might want to, crib them there for a little bit. But I don't want this group of fantastic experts to go without seeing if there are any open questions. We are behind, but let's make sure we get your questions answered. Yeah, David.
I'll make it as fast as I can. This has to do with the PTC and the ITC. Okay, if I recall correctly, this is David Litton with McCarthy, Leonard and Cameron. If I recall correctly, the IRA for the first time allowed a tax credit to be given back in the form of money actually paid to the taxpayer, so that if you have a tax exempt organization, the federal funds will be given back to the taxpayer or the entity rather than just reduce the tax liability. What is next step for implementing something like that? Caleb, that's probably you, but.
So I apologize if I'm not understanding your question exactly, but so for the people checking in, I believe the question is, What's the next step in implementing the, are you referring to the buyback program for the PTCs? The direct payment?
The direct payments for the non-tax entities,
Okay, so
is that correct, David?
yeah, so for direct pay, there are certain entities where if they apply for PTC, they can qualify for direct payment, which literally means that it is treated as the actual value of the credit is treated as a direct payment to the IRS. Ironically, the entities that are eligible for that are usually tax exempt, so you wonder why they would need that treatment. That is, my understanding is that's largely an incentive to encourage partnerships between investor-owned utilities and say like co-ops or other nonprofits, where if the nonprofit is building and creates the PTC, that can then be sold to the IOU. And I do apologize. Am I understanding your question exactly?
I guess my question related more to a city, municipality, or a county organization that doesn't pay taxes. And then the federal government would take the tax credit amount and make a direct payment to the city or the county and benefit the city or the county.
Right. So with the example of a municipal utility, imagine you have Blackacre City that creates some type of new renewable energy development, and that energy development is eligible for a PTC. The city itself would be eligible for the buyback program, but the city's not paying taxes. The PTCs themselves could be transferable to value to another entity that can use that tax relief status. So that's how a entity that normally wouldn't be able to get it to take advantage of that tax treatment can then still be getting money directly for that type of investment. So the question
I
was,
would say that I do know that Tim Michaels has been working on this particular issue for a while, so David, definitely afterwards, you want to talk with him. But Tim, if you have like 2 minutes or like 30 seconds, you'll pass. So I know Tim has been working on it specifically, but yeah.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Amy Davenport with Stinson. Thanks for your presentation. So I know Joe mentioned distributing the funds fairly and equitably is the goal. And I know that there's been a lot of controversy surrounding the Justice 40 guidance and how that's to be done. What guidance will DNR and EIERA operate under now? Or what are you looking at now to be able to accomplish the Justice 40 goals?
Well, that's a good question, but we don't have anything in place now because we haven't seen anything from EPA. So it'd be a little premature for us to get anything in writing until we know exactly what, their parameters are going to be. And that's going to be the biggest challenge because, 2 of these 3 pots of money are going to low income and disadvantaged communities, period. So, well, I should say, or the benefit of that funding is going to go to low income or disadvantaged communities. So it's a very subtle point, but an important one for, the majority of that funding. So we're waiting eagerly to see what EPA comes out with. They're being inundated right now with comments. All the states, all the interest groups, even EFAB, if you're familiar with the Environmental Finance Advisory Board with EPA. It's a formalized advisory board that EPA leans on, and it's made up of academics. It's made up of state people, finance people, technical people. They charged EFAB with providing very specific guidance on how to roll this program out on top of all the comments they're taking. So EFAB is supposed to report out to EPA by the 15th of this month. So we're going to be tuning into that meeting and seeing what their final recommendations are going to be. So it's going to be very interesting because there's a lot of states that are way ahead of us. There are green banks in place in a half a dozen states. I think we're situated very well. We have all the authorities in place. We have we're just looking for some capital to get things started. So great question, but I don't know.
All right. If you all wouldn't mind, thanking, pardon me, Elizabeth, Lane, Caleb, Craig, and Joe for their time. Thank you all very much. Look forward to working with you. I know that MEI internally has had discussions about trying to help coordinate some communications between all the different parties interested in these funds to make sure that folks that are looking for a collaboration can get one, that we know what the state's doing and what private entities are doing, so we can amplify our opportunity to bring those funds to Missouri. So our next panel is on energy storage as an economic driver for Missouri. So if we could have our speakers come up, specifically Phil Brown with ICL, Creighton Brown with Intersys, and Chris DeVille with Go Run. And I believe first up is Chris. And just make sure that you have the mic closer to your mouth so the folks online can hear.
Thank you. Am I on? Okay, good afternoon. My name is Chris Neville. I'm the Asset Development Director for the Go Run Company. And if you're not familiar with Go Run, we are a mining and metals company based here in Missouri. I've been here about 160 years. I haven't been here the whole time. I've been here about 10 years. And I have with me today Tammy Stanke, who is our Director of Communications for Go Run, and she's also a member of a number of the Battery Association trade groups. She knows a lot about energy storage and batteries. So if I get any hard questions, I'll defer those to Tammy. Again, we are a mining and metals company. We have one of the largest underground mines in Missouri. We also have one of the largest battery recycling facilities in the state of Missouri. So a lot of people don't know that. And that's our operations. We provide raw materials to the battery industry, predominantly what our materials are used for. And we have an opportunity in this state of Missouri, great opportunity in the topics of critical minerals, which I'll be talking about today. We supply some of those minerals in the market today. We have an opportunity to expand that in Missouri. We're also very keen on energy storage and battery manufacturing. That's our business and what our materials go into. So next slide, please. I'm going to start with the good news. So if we can go to the next slide, the good news is that the battery market manufacturing is very strong, and the projections are very good for the future. So that's good for our company. It's good for a lot of battery manufacturing companies that are based here in Missouri. So what you can see from these projections is the battery market projections are very strong. This shows a 20-year projection, 10 years we've already seen. We've seen tremendous growth. On the left side is the total capacity of energy storage projection, up to almost a 10-fold increase over this period, which is amazing. On the right side is the size of the market in terms of dollar amounts, about a 5-fold increase over this period, up to a $275 billion market, with some really impressive projections over the next 10 years, mostly driven by electric vehicle batteries. You can see the color coding there. The blue bars on the left are electric vehicle-based batteries or lithium batteries. The bottom green is lead-based batteries, which is really the base of what we mostly produce today. And on the right-hand side is, again, the dollars. On the top, the dark green is the electric vehicle-specific battery projections. And again, the bottom is the lead-based batteries, which for our industry is a mature industry, and it's still showing like 3% growth, which is a very strong growth. But the really dramatic opportunity is in the electric vehicle batteries, or the future of electric vehicles. This is a worldwide projection. The next slide, please. This shows the stationary battery projection. So non-vehicular applications like grid storage or electric vehicle battery charging applications. Again, very strong growth, strong demands. This is all types of batteries, where it's lead-based, lithium-based. And I think our view at this point is it's really everything, all the materials that we have at our disposal to try and meet these demands. It's going to be all the different types of batteries that we need. So there's opportunities in all the market sectors. Next slide, please. What I previously showed was the global market.